Tyreek Hill sort of made the internet explode with his post-game comments on Sunday. He said, quote, "I have to do what's best for me and my family. If that's here or wherever the case may be, I'm about to open that door for myself. I'm out, bro. It was great playing here, but at the end of the day, I have to do what's best for my career." First and foremost, Jori, is Tyreek Hill requesting a trade? Like, where are we on this right now?
Yeah, Tyreek Hill, as of the time that we're recording this on Wednesday, has not requested a trade. And I think that's what we have to understand is what someone says in the heat of an emotion after the game compared with their follow-up actions, not the same thing. I give Dolphins head coach Mike McDaniel some credit because he said, look, I'm not going to address this with him now. I'm going to let him cool down. What I would actually say is more concerning to me than Tyreek Hill's comments is some of the other comments that were coming out surrounding the Dolphins. Because look, I've interviewed Tyreek Hill when he was with the Kansas City Chiefs before, and I have interviewed him when he was with the Miami Dolphins. And respectfully, Tyreek kind of just says what's on his mind. There's not a lot of filter. I think he and most people close to him would agree with that sentiment. And so to me, what he says and what he does, I think we can put in two different categories, also recognizing that the history of the NFL is that if you are as talented as Tyreek Hill is, or even a little bit below that, you can pretty much say whatever you want and they still want you there. I had someone ask me this week, do you really want Tyreek Hill in Miami if he doesn't want to be there? The answer is yes. If he's still playing, as long as he's not taking himself out of every game, as he might have done in the last quarter when he was hurt, then, no, I know, but like, last quarter of the season, he might have been hurt, might have been not, whatever, then you want him there. But to me, what was more concerning is apparently there have been multiple Dolphins players repeatedly late to meetings, and Mike McDaniel has tried to discipline them for it, and it's not really working. And Mike McDaniel addressed that on the record. And so I don't think the problem here is, does Tyreek Hill want to leave? I think the problem here is, why do you have players not showing up, not being there on time, not staying until the end of the game? Like the whole show, be early, stay late. And at UT, it was show up early, stay late, be loud, wear orange. So I guess they don't need to wear orange necessarily. But I think that's my question, is how much of this is reflective of a Dolphins culture? Because the Tyreek part doesn't concern me as much as the Dolphins culture element.
Yeah, a few things on Tyreek. This is the ultimate, if you're good enough, you can get by with anything. Because what he did was no different than Devondre Campbell. It really wasn't. He refused to go into a game. That should be pretty much inexcusable. But Tyreek Hill is Tyreek Hill, so it's different. Secondly, I found it hilarious that Tyreek Hill changed his profile picture on X to his face photoshopped over Antonio Brown leaving the field. Really? That's the guy you want to compare yourself to right now, Tyreek? Woo! All right, then. That's something. That's a statement, I guess. But really what it comes down to me is, you talked about it. You said this, Jori. Do you want Tyreek Hill around if he's doing this and doing that? And the answer is yes. I say, Tyreek Hill just played 17 games and didn't even get 1,000 yards. He's 30 years old. I think this is an exit ramp for the Dolphins. I don't think Tyreek Hill's the same player. Yes, he had some games with bad quarterbacks. I get that. But at what point this season did Tyreek Hill look like Tyreek Hill? This was a troubling downturn. His yards per game were cut in half. He looked like he might not be cooked, but he looks like he's definitely on the back nine, and he might be on the 17th hole, deep on the back nine. So I don't know that Tyreek Hill is still that dude.
Who do you think was his quarterback for most of these games?
Wait. I got an answer. Most of them. I'm in on this.
Most. You're fair.
Look at the stats. I'll be a stat nerd for a minute. Right now, if you look this year in overall targets, for example, Tyreek Hill was 19th, for example. But let's just take the stat line of catches, targets, and yardage. He was below Jacoby Myers in all three of those. Who was Jacoby Myers' quarterback? Aiden O'Connell and Gardner Minshew. So if we're going to sit here and say who is Tyreek Hill's quarterback,
they are better than Huntley or whoever they were trotting out there. I can't even. Tim Boyle got a start or something like that. Yeah, I get it. He didn't have great quarterback play, but at what point did you watch Tyreek Hill this season and say, yes, that's the explosive Tyreek Hill we all know? It wasn't happening. And there's many reasons for that, but also we got to keep in mind he's going to be 31 years old next year, and he's a guy who relies entirely on being the fastest guy in the field. So I don't know. I'm just saying, and also changing the culture. I think this is a big part of it too. And you started talking about that, Jori. It really seems like this Dolphins team, although they've been successful in this season, they didn't make the playoffs pretty much because Tua missed games. When Tua played, they were still a pretty good football team. But all of a sudden, you're having a lot of questions about the culture. And Chris Greer comes back, and Mike McDaniel comes back. I think McDaniel's a good coach. I do. But when guys are just whatever, I'm not showing up to meetings, I wonder if that is really, you can't fix that at some point unless you really do something drastic. maybe getting rid of the guy who wouldn't check back into the second half of a game when you're still technically alive for the playoffs. Maybe that's one way to change the culture a little bit. I don't know. I'm just saying, I don't know that we're to the
Mike
point where
McDaniel's style.
it's really not. He's a player's
isn't
guy,
there a
but
problem at some point, Jori? Like most coaches, if your team is just not respecting the coach, and you can see it palpably, like if somebody chooses not to come back into a game and then a coach comes out and says, to your point earlier, that, I've tried finding people, I can't do much more about it. Well, man, if the team disrespects the coach so much, like I agree with we all feel like Mike McDaniel is a very good coach, but if we take the massive 70-0 win over the Broncos or whatever it was from last year out of this whole equation, are we viewing Mike differently? Because right now what we see is a coach that didn't make the playoffs and a coach that doesn't even have enough respect from his own locker room for guys to show up on time. Like we would absolutely destroy most coaches for having that level of insubordination on a staff. Like the whole Mike Tomlin, how you'll do anything is how you'll do everything, or whatever that is. Like these coachisms, well, they're not respecting their coach enough to even show up, even when it's costing them money. Like that at some point has to be reflective of a problem with Mike McDaniel.
I think this is actually interesting because to me, it speaks to what's going on with two playoff teams right now. Because in Philadelphia, we have Vic Fangio as defensive coordinator, and we are watching Vic Fangio have this fantastic season. The defense is responding to him. They love what he's done. They love how he's put personnel in creative places. And this is right after the Miami Dolphins were like, we don't want to work with him. This guy sucks. Like they were not very flattering about Vic Fangio. And it's interesting also to me because I think the same question about the Miami culture is going to influence the Brian Flores interviews. So obviously there's a lawsuit going on as well. And it's not clear to me how exactly that will impact his ability to get a head coaching job. But when you look at what he's done and how effective he has been with the Minnesota Vikings unit, I think what's interesting is I asked an executive yesterday, I said, do you think that lawsuit will keep him from getting jobs? Like, can he get a job? And the executive responded, the lawsuit's the least of his concerns. I would be more concerned if I'm hiring him about what Tua and the Dolphins players were saying. And while I do believe in treating people right, and I do believe personally in a positive, encouraging, uplifting culture, I think what's interesting is that a guy like Vic Fangio, a guy like Brian Flores, not good fits in Miami, good fits in Minnesota and Philadelphia. And I think we might be seeing some of this of like, there are coaches who are going to thrive more in that Florida culture where the standards and the expectations are a little bit different than some of these other teams. And I'm not trying to sound like, oh, New York or like Northeast, we're tougher up here. I'm not from here anyway. But I do think there's an element of what culture for years has been expected in Miami. And is this a new thing or is this something that has been building over time?
I just think the shocking part of this is now what we have is one of the biggest names in the NFL, who has been one of the best players in the NFL, basically coming out and throwing his team under the bus, and then a coach throwing the whole culture under the bus, and nobody really standing up to address how it's going to be fixed or different next year. Like, what is part of this has to be, okay, if you bring Tyreek back into the fold, what are the Dolphins going to do to get this better, to make this right, and then to fix whatever is happening in their locker room? Because above and beyond the quarterback issues on this, which I know are huge. I understand that Tua being hurt is a part of this, but Tua's hurt all the time. So number one, how are you addressing that? Number two, how are you fixing your culture? And number three, what are you doing to actually make the Dolphins a better football team between now and the beginning of next season? Because the Dolphins are a team every year, Frank, we sit here and praise as one of the teams that should be viewed as a contender. And yet again, at the end of the season, we're looking at them saying, meh, they're just kind of meh as a franchise.